Mike McCutchon, City Council, Place 4, City of Corpus Christi.
Well, I have the after lunch time frame, which is when people tend to get a little bit sleepy. I don't have a PowerPoint. I'm going to have to have you all look at me, and that's what us politicians like anyway. Like, right, Chuck? Can you hear me? Is it this one that I speak into, or this one? This one?
The wire one, yes.
All right. And John asked me whether I had a little bio sheet to introduce myself, or so he could introduce me. I told him I was going to take care of that myself, and I kind of incorporated it in here. And it has to do with why I was invited to speak here. And obviously, I'm City Council, Place 4, City of Corpus Christi. This is my district. The island is my district. But beyond that, there's some relevant points in my background that I hope will help me serve that purpose on the City Council, and hopefully allow me to give you all a little bit of information from my standpoint that might be worthwhile, and also to understand the science that comes out of this conference and implement it. I do have a scientific background. My undergraduate degree was UT Austin, biology degree. During that time, I spent some summers in Port Aransas. I spent one summer lifeguarding on the beach for Nueces County, and spent some other summers over in Port Aransas waiting tables at Seafood and Spaghetti Works. And during that time, helped my way towards my degree by getting some upper-level science classes at the Marine Science Institute, studying oceanography and ecology and stuff like that. So, in addition, studied meteorology in Austin, and hopefully that helps me understand the ecosystem out here. Spent 8 years in Galveston, watching that coastal community, and getting my medical degree and my training in anesthesia there. And then came back here, where I continue to spend a lot of time on the beach, surfing, windsurfing, fishing, taking my kids out there. And been a long-standing member of Surf Rider Foundation, and so I'm trying to stay abreast of the things that happen on our beach and how we affect them. So I do have some background, not nearly as much as the amount of background that people have in this room, the scientists in this room, and I am really impressed, number one, that John and his group organized this to address this important topic, and that I want to thank them, and I also want to thank the participants, the people who have come to this conference, because y'all have echoed his concern and shown that the management of our beaches, and particularly Sargassum, how it affects our coastal environment is an important thing up and down the coast. Hopefully we will get some questions answered coming out of this. I tried to fashion my talk on kind of 2 points: how I can be useful to you, and then again how in turn this conference can be useful to us, the City of Corpus Christi and my district, Place 4. And the way that I think I can be useful to you is by telling you a little bit about council policy and the use of our beaches, and how some of the policy decisions that have come to us have been dealt with, and how we're going to deal with those in the future. First of all, I think we need to recognize what this beach is, and for those of you that live in Galveston, South Padre, Port Aransas, I'm going to make an initial statement that hopefully I'll temper a little bit, but we need to recognize that we are on a sandbar. It's basically just a sandbar that comes up out of the Gulf of Mexico. There's a series of sandbars as the Gulf gets shallower, and there's one that comes up out of the water, and it's been here for a very long time. It's been here and it's been developed in some areas for a very long time. But we need to understand that it is moving, and we've heard some of that, and we'll hear some more from Dr. Chabot. Is he on the? No? Okay. Well,
He can be if he wants to be.
I thought he was on the agenda, but some of y'all are familiar with his work in coastal erosion. The other thing about it is that it's subject to periodic inundation, and while that may be a 100-year event, the effects of that inundation can be pretty dramatic. We can look at the land cut down, that's less than 100 years ago, that the hurricane basically produced the land cut by taking all of our sand from the dunes and spreading it across the Laguna Madre and cutting off the upper and lower Laguna Madres. More recently, here at this seawall, Hurricane Allen had a pretty profound effect, but in showing the resiliency of our will and also the desire of us to live near the water's edge, the seawall was rebuilt, and we continue on. More recently, Hurricane Brett came through, cut five passes through to the Gulf of Mexico. Very small, compact hurricane, but just shows the effects of what can happen out here. We don't plan our lives around catastrophes, though, and so we will continue to live on the island, and we'll continue to develop the island. And there are a lot of contributing factors that enable that, and primarily most of the island's privately owned. Secondarily, people choose to live out here, which drives the economy of the situation, and it continues to be insurable property that we put on the island. So we need to understand that despite this being a sandbar and despite natural forces having a lot of play here, we need to find a way to successfully coexist on the island. So the island is going to develop, and while the island develops, there's going to be a somewhat of a ongoing discussion, maybe clashes between what I'll call the Keeper Wild bunch, after a sign that those of you who drove Park Road 53 for many years saw on one of the development billboards along the side. Somebody spray painted Keeper Wild across a development billboard, and that stayed there for many, many years. There's going to be a clash between them and the people who see an opportunity to serve the people who are looking for coastal living and coastal tourism. And finding the balance and looking for the compromise in these interests is my goal on the City Council. And the good scientific information that comes out of this is a key element in being able to make the decisions that affect our island. Most of our decisions are made with respect to the question of how the public interfaces with the beach. And to some extent, that's the whole reason we're here today. We're addressing the demands and the expectations of the public about how we use our beaches. And if there were no public demand for being at the beach in some form or another, we probably wouldn't be here. We just let the beach do what it will, and let the sargassum go where it will, and let nature take its course. But collectively, the public wants to be at the beach, experience the beaches, and that demands, like I think you heard Rob Conti talk about, that we remove at least some of the sargassum in some of the places on the island. How we do that is very important. I'd like to address how we like to use the beach, and primarily whether you're talking about building homes or condominiums, or whether you're talking about bringing your kids to the beach for the day, it all revolves around how close to the shore we demand to be. And that's what puts a lot of the stress on the coastal environment. two primary issues that affect our ability to get up to the water's edge are the width of the dune complex and the width of the beach itself. And I'd like for y'all to think of that conceptually. Just take a cross section of the beach, and you've got sand width, you've got the line of vegetation, you've got the dune complex width, and you've got behind that. Basically, it's how far is it acceptable to walk to the water's edge. And whether you're using it during the day or whether you're staying in a condominium, that's what guides our beach usage. It's a pretty long haul from behind the dunes to the water's edge in this area. And if you think about it, the developers that built the seawall that we're behind right here were the first ones to really state in this area that that's too far a distance to start from behind the dune complex and move all the way to the water's edge to use our beaches, and basically replace the sand dunes with the concrete seawall. Now, there are people who would argue that that's not the right move. I think by virtue of the fact that we've been spending quite a bit of money trying to save the beach in front of this seawall. Some of them might have some credence to their beliefs, but at the same time, when I go to the beach, and I use condominiums myself, I look for the one that's front row, and so there's a demand there. When I stay at Port Royal with the family, I end up not carrying all our gear down to the beach, but I drive around. So that's being that far back from the beach is a little bit of an impediment to the enjoyment of our beaches. Our dune line, in terms of the protection that it affords, is the envy of most coasts. But when you think about the beach access issue, it adds the width of that dune complex adds stress to the question of how we use our beaches. Shortly before I came on council, we had a pretty public debate about how close you can build to the line of vegetation, and came out with a rule, the 350-foot rule, which I think applies well to our situation. It doesn't necessarily apply to beaches like Port Aransas, or which is not receding at the rate of the city of Corpus Christi beaches, or to Galveston, where much of that beach has already been replaced by concrete, or in some situations, I guess there are homes there that are being claimed by the sea. So perhaps, in retrospect, they might have wanted a 350-foot rule. Right after I got into office, I found out that there was an attempt by one of our city staff, actually, to circumvent that whole 350-foot rule. And in the end, rather than discuss it publicly, that person's not working for us anymore. And this is one of the things that I think is important, is to do these things out in the open. And I think the election of leaders who will put things on the table, talk about the clashes between the Keep Her Wild bunch and the Develop the Beach bunch openly, and come to open conclusions that see us moving forward in unity together are very important. We had a pretty good open dialogue about a year and a half ago, and stated rather emphatically how we want to use our beaches, and stated that it involves cars on the beach in some fashion. And I think the width of the dune complex is the issue that makes us different from Galveston or South Padre, in that it's kind of I've said before, it's a long way to get from, if you take the cars off the beach, put them behind the dune complex, put them in parking lots, then the public enjoyment of the beaches would decline. So the other issue with respect to how we use our beaches is the width of the beach itself, and that's kind of where the rubber hits the road, or rubber hits the sand in this situation. Putting cars safely on the beach is dependent on adequate beach width, and we currently have a rule in our city limits that no driving shall take place within 50 feet of the water's edge. Now there's times that the water's within 50 feet of the water's edge, and in my recollection, I think our beaches have been much wider in the past. I know they've been a lot wider right here in front of this seawall. I know they've been a lot wider up and down. My recollection of the National Seashore, for instance, is that the beaches have been much wider in the past. Once you get to a beach width of about 75 feet, you start having to answer the questions of how does the how am I doing on time? How does the continued management of the beach so that we can drive on it affect the dune complex? Because if you've got your 50 feet margin from the water's edge to where you can drive, and you've got a dune complex like Dr. Watson was talking about that naturally wants to build forward, and you are moving sand and debris to allow people to drive up and down the beach, then the width of the beach becomes critically important. And so our management practices in the city need to keep that in mind, and we need to really address what we do on the beach with an eye towards beach width. I think that's the most important thing in terms of beach access that we can do. It's widely perceived that our current practices of taking sargassum and sand from the water's edge and front stacking it in front of the dunes is not only unsightly but also narrows the beach. And taking the sand from the water's edge and putting it there not just brings the water towards the dunes but brings the dunes towards the water. I've asked that we stop the front stacking, and we have in the works a permit to do some back stacking like you saw with the cut through the dunes and putting the sand or mostly, hopefully, just sargassum behind the dune's edge. And hopefully that permit will be coming soon. I've also directed staff to quit scraping down you saw some pictures of bulldozers earlier, and I've seen some since I've been in office, taken some pictures and given them to our city staff saying we can't scrape every bit of sargassum off the water's edge because you end up scraping up the sand. Plus, the effects of sargassum left in place on beach width is probably beneficial. So there's a lot of questions that I'm going to kind of ask that this symposium do the second part. The first part of my talk was how do I perceive, what can I offer to you guys, and the second part is what can you offer back to us. And I want to know whether there's data that shows whether other beaches that are not maintained like ours are staying a lot wider. And in my, jaunts up and down San Jose Island and down the National Seashore, I don't know whether we are keeping good data on whether beach width is narrowing up and down the entire coast, but in my own, and individual data points aren't very good, scientific studies needed, but it seems to me that all the beaches are getting narrower. That will, in the future, put more pressure on the ability to access our beaches in front of the dune complex. If we are going to continue to drive on the beaches, are we going to continue to maintain them in street-like fashion, and additional research on how doing that affects our sand budget and our dune complex is very important. And I've had some thoughts also on erosion rates. Vertical bulkheading, as we know, increases erosion rates. But if we are leaving, you've seen photos of large floats of sargassum, which effectively have created vertical bulkheads along the water's edge. Could removing some of that sargassum improve or decrease the erosion rates that we're seeing? I want to thank everybody for coming again. You guys are the pioneers in sargassum science, and I'd also like to ask that ongoing studies be funded appropriately. The amount of money that comes out of the development of our beaches is extremely significant, and how we manage these beaches is going to make a decision on whether or not we have to spend a lot of money in the future on renourishment and stuff like that. So spending money on the front end in erosion rates and coastal management, seaweed management is money well spent. Thanks.
Questions? We got time for one. So we can keep on.
The only one.
Okay.
Two questions, quick one. How'd you get this, the street repaving for today? They're repaving the Park Road out here.
You'll have to ask TxDOT. That's not city.
All right, good. Okay, on the business. Great work. And also, though, I've got the traffic management, beach management, traffic ordinances and all here. And as I mentioned to the city council a couple weeks ago, I thought it was 100 foot. 100 feet required from the cement seawall to the water. But on closer scrutiny, it actually says the city manager may establish pedestrian safe areas 25 feet from the lower edge of the seawall, and also a 25-foot traffic corridor after that. So that would actually be 50 feet.
Plus the 50 feet from the water's edge.
50 feet to the water's edge, yeah.
So, yeah, technically anytime the beach is less than about 100 feet wide, you could compress the driving lane, since it's one way, down to about 12 feet and cut out 12 feet of that, or 13 feet of that. But technically anytime it's less than 85 to 100 feet wide, we can stop all traffic in front of the seawall. Now, if you are going to go down that road, you're also going to have to acknowledge that I was down, for instance, in Clayburgh County recently and stepped off the vegetation line to the water's edge, and it's 75 feet. So most of our beaches now are less than 75 feet. And if you're going to say you can't drive here, you're effectively going to have to deal with the situation that you might be saying you can't drive anywhere on these beaches because they're just too narrow, with the exception of Port Aransas.
I hear what you're saying. I know it's a really difficult, touchy, controversial issue. And to me, the biggest thing is safety. As I said to City Council, I've had a lot of experience in seeing what people look like when they get all busted up and search and rescue and like that. And I just see that happening out here unless the traffic in front of the seawall is stopped.
Yeah, and that's a discussion for another time, and maybe we'll have the chance to vote on that.